The rain poured in relentless sheets, a cold, gray shroud blurring the twisting roads of Asheville, North Carolina. I sat in my battered Toyota Corolla, engine silent, wipers off, letting the water smear the windshield into a distorted mosaic of greens and grays. Beyond the glass, the Blue Ridge Mountains hulked, their peaks devoured by a thick, rolling fog, like weary titans cloaked in mist. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles bone white, though the car hadn't budged in hours. It was October 2024, and I was 29, too young to feel this ancient, too old to drift this aimlessly. The scent of drenched pine and loamy earth crept through the cracked window, mingling with the bitter tang of stale coffee festering in the cup holder. I'd been driving in circles along Highway 74, tires humming a futile tune against the wet asphalt, trying to outpace the hollow ache gnawing my chest. It wasn't working. Every mile dragged me closer to the house I'd vowed never to see again, and every mile sharpened the memories, each one a blade twisting deeper into a wound that refused to scab over. My name's Rowan Keller, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew my life. Turns out, I didn't know shit. It started with a phone call, the kind that splits your world in two. I was in my cramped apartment above the brewery downtown, a shoebox with a dripping faucet and a view of a grimy brick wall. I'd just clocked out from pouring IPAs. For tourists in their flannel shirts and overpriced hiking boots, my hair still reeking of hops, and the friar's greasy haze. The phone buzzed on the counter, and I nearly let it slide. Mom's name on the screen usually meant another nag about skipping Sunday dinner. I should have ignored it. "Rowan," she'd said, her voice frail, brittle as a dried leaf about to crumble. "It's your brother. Eli's. Gone. Gone." That's all she gave me at first. Like he'd wandered off into the woods behind the house again, chasing fireflies until the stars burned bright. But then the rest came: car accident. Late last night. Didn't make it, and the room tilted, floor slipping beneath me like I'd downed a keg myself. Eli was 26, 3 years my junior. The golden kid who could charm a snake or climb a cliff without breaking a sweat. He didn't just die. People like Eli didn't die. I drove up to the house that same night, the one Dad hammered together back when he still gave a damn. It perches on a ridge overlooking the valley, all cedar planks and wide windows that catch the sunset's glow, surrounded by pines that hiss secrets when the wind stirs them. Mom was a mess when I walked in, eyes red as raw meat, hands trembling, a wad of tissues mashed into a lifeline. Dad was worse. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just slumped in his recliner with a beer, staring into the unlit fireplace like it held the answers to why his son was cold. My sister, June, fluttered around like a frantic moth, brewing coffee no one touched, muttering about funeral plans in a voice too steady for the moment. She's 32, the eldest, the one who always had her act together, married to a lawyer named Mark, 2 kids, a Charlotte house with a white picket fence straight out of a magazine. She'd sped up from the city the second she heard, all efficiency, no tears. I couldn't stay long. The air in that house felt dense, deceptive, pressing lies into my skin. I needed out. That's how I ended up parked on the shoulder of 74, rain hammering the roof, replaying Mom's call, my gut twisting with a certainty I couldn't name. Eli's death wasn't the secret. It was the spark that lit the fuse. The next morning, I headed to the garage, Eli's sanctuary, where he kept his climbing gear, his sketchbooks, that beat-up guitar he strummed off key with a grin. I told myself I was there to find something to bury with him, something truer than flowers or a preacher's hollow words. June trailed me, probably to keep an eye on me, though she'd never admit it. The garage smelled of motor oil and damp cardboard, boxes stacked like sentinels against the walls, some scrawled with Eli's chaotic handwriting, others blank. I started at the workbench, sifting through coiled ropes and clinking carabiners, while June poked at a pile of faded flannels. Then I saw it, a shoebox, shoved behind a rusted toolbox, its lid sealed with tape. my name scratched in black marker. Rowan. Find something? June asked, her voice casual but her eyes sharp as she glanced over. Maybe, I said, peeling the tape with a slow rip. Inside was a jumble letters, photos, a key with a tag I didn't recognize. I pulled out the top sheet, a letter in Eli's jagged script, dated 2 months back. My pulse thudded as I read. Rowan, if you're reading this, I fucked up. I didn't mean to dig this deep, but I couldn't stop. It's about Dad. He's not who we thought. There's money, big money, and it's dirty. I've got proof, but I don't know what to do with it. Mom knows something too, I think. Don't trust her. I'm sorry. I'll fix this. I swear. Eli. I read it 3 times, each word a stone sinking in my gut. Dirty money. Dad. Mom. What had Eli unearthed? I shoved it all back, slammed the lid. Rowan? June was closer now, frowning. What is it? Nothing, I lied, tucking the box under my arm. Just some old sketches. Her eyes narrowed the same look she gave me when I was 15 and Joy rode Dad's truck, but she didn't press. Not then. That night, I barricaded myself in my apartment and dumped the box's guts across the floor. A bank statement glared up tens of thousands in deposits, funneled through a shell company I'd never heard of, dates stretching back years. A grainy photo of Dad shaking hands with a slick-haired suit, time-stamped 2010 when his construction gig supposedly cratered. The keys tag read, Unit 17 Asheville Storage. A list of dates and places meetings, drop-offs, names I didn't know but could smell weren't clean. Eli hadn't just stumbled onto something he'd pried open a goddamn bomb. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. My mind churned, slotting pieces into place. Dad, always distant, hard as granite, now a crook. Mom, with her church pies and sappy movies, in on it. And Eli's accident, no skid off a dry road, felt right. Someone in my family had blood on their hands, and the more I stared at that box, the surer I got. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I sat there, the dim light of a single bulb buzzing overhead, feeling something cold and sharp coil inside me. Hurt wasn't enough anymore. It was rage pure, slow burning, the kind that doesn't quit until it's fed. The rain hadn't relented by the next afternoon, drumming a staccato beat on my apartment's tin roof as I stood at the kitchen counter. The shoebox splayed open like a gutted fish. Its contents sprawled out bank statements with numbers that didn't add up $50,000 share. $75,000. There, a decade of shadows, the photo of Dad with that stranger pinned under a fridge magnet, his forced smile a mask the camera saw through. Eli's letter crumpled beside it, ink smudged where my thumb had pressed too hard. A knock snapped me out of it, sharp and sudden. I froze, heart hammering, half expecting Dad to barge in with a shovel and a lie. But it was Lena, my ex, standing in the doorway, soaked hoodie clinging to her, dark hair plastered to her face like wet ink. She didn't wait for an invite, just pushed past, trailing rain and the faint scent of lavender into the room, a smell that hit me like a memory. I'd tried to bury. Jesus, Rowan, you look like hell, she said, tossing her keys onto the counter with a clatter. Her eyes flicked to the mess of papers, then locked on me, sharp and searching. What's going on? Lena and I had been together 2 years wild, messy, the kind of love that leaves you bruised. She's 27, a tattoo artist with a studio downtown, all edges and curves, ink snaking up her arms like living vines. We'd split 6 months back after a blowout. I can still feel the way she'd screamed at me for shutting her out, for never saying. I loved her, her fist slamming the doorframe as she stormed off into the night. I'd let her go, too stubborn to chase, too scared to admit she was right. Seeing her now, water dripping from her sleeves, stirred something. I'd shoved deep want, regret, a ache I didn't have room for. Eli's dead, I said, flat as a weather report, the words tasting like ash. Her face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, hands up. Don't. I'm fine. You're not fine. she snapped, crossing her arms, her voice cutting through the haze. And what's all this? She nodded at the box, her gaze piercing. I didn't want to tell her, didn't want her anywhere near this mess. But the words spilled anyway. Eli's letter, the money, Dad's lies, Mom's shadow in it all. Her eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. And by the time I finished, she was pacing, fists clenched tight. Your dad? That's insane, Rowan. He's an asshole, sure. But this? And your mom? No way. She knew, I said, sharper than I meant. The accusation slicing the air. Eli said not to trust her. She's hiding something, Lena. They both are. She stopped, staring at me like I'd sprouted horns. So what? You're gonna play detective? Confront them? What if they… She cut herself off, but I heard it. What if they killed him? What if they'd kill me too? I don't know yet, I lied, my voice steady while my mind roared. Truth was, I'd already decided whoever did this to Eli was going to burn. Their reputation, their wealth, their happiness torched to ash. But I couldn't drag Lena into it. Not yet. She stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm, soft but insistent. You don't have to do this alone. I loved Eli too, you know. Let me help. No, I said, pulling away, the word a wall. This is my fight. Her jaw tightened, hurt flashing in her dark eyes like a storm breaking. Fine, shut me out again. But don't expect me to sit here and watch you destroy yourself. She snatched her keys and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the walls, leaving her lavender scent lingering like a phantom. I couldn't shake. I wanted to run after her, tell her I needed her more than I'd ever admit, but I didn't. Not because I didn't care, because I did, too damn much. And that's why she had to stay clear. For now. That night, I drove back to the house, the ridge rising dark against the bruised sky, rain slashing the windshield like a punishment. Mom was in the kitchen, chopping onions with mechanical precision, the sharp tang stinging my eyes as I leaned in the doorway. She didn't look up, just kept slicing, tears streaming down her cheeks, grief or guilt. I couldn't tell anymore, maybe both. Where's Dad? I asked, voice low, testing the water. Out back, she mumbled, barely audible over the rhythmic thwack of the knife, fixing the shed. I watched her, hunting for cracks, shaky hands, a flinch, anything to betray her. Nothing. She was too good. Her mask polished over years. Mom, I said, slow, deliberate, letting the words hang. Eli left me something. A letter. Said stuff about Dad. About money. Her knife froze mid-cut, hovering over the board, blade glinting under the fluorescent light. Her shoulders stiffened for a heartbeat. Then she forced a laugh, brittle and jagged, like glass about to shatter. Oh, you know Eli, she said, too quick, always making up stories. Yeah, I said, stepping closer, my shadow falling over her. Except he's dead now. Funny how that works. She turned then, eyes wide, onion tears blending with something raw, real. Rowan, don't. Not now. Don't what? I pressed, voice dropping to a razor's edge. Ask questions? Find out why my brother's in a box? You tried to warn him, didn't you? But Dad stopped you. Her face crumpled, a sob tearing free as the knife clattered to the counter. I begged him to stop digging, she whispered, hands trembling. I left him a note once, slipped it under his door. Stay out of it, Eli, for us. But he never saw it. Your father said it'd ruin us all if it got out. I didn't know, not until after. The air thickened. Her confession, a gut punch I hadn't braced for. She'd known, tried to save Eli in her weak, broken way, and failed silenced by Dad's grip. You should have told me, I said, voice cold, turning away, leaving her there with her tears and the unspoken lies choking the room. The onions sat abandoned, their sting fading as I headed for the back door. Dad was next, and I wasn't letting him slip away with a grunt and a glare. The shed smelled of sawdust and gasoline. a harsh bite that hit me as I stepped inside, the rains drumming muffled by the slanted roof. Dad was hunched over a workbench, a lantern throwing jagged shadows across his lined face, the flickering light painting him like some grizzled specter. He didn't turn when I shut the door with a thud, just kept tinkering with the chains. Ah, the clink of metal on metal, a steady pulse in the quiet. The shed was his fortress tools aligned like soldiers on pegboards, a radio in the corner spitting static laced country tunes, the air thick with the ghosts of better days. I used to trail him here as a kid, handing him wrenches, watching him work with a reverence. I didn't understand then. Now it felt like a cage, the walls pressing in, the past a lie I couldn't unsee. Need something? He grunted, voice rough as gravel, still not looking up. Yeah, I said, crossing my arms, planting my feet firm. Answers. He snorted, setting the chainsaw down with a heavy thud that echoed. Speak plain, Rowan. I ain't got time for games. I pulled the photo from my pocket, the one of him in the suit, 2010 stamped in the corner, and tossed it onto the bench. It skidded across the scarred wood, landing square in his line of sight. His eyes flicked to it, then back to the saw, but I caught the twitch in his jaw, the way his thick fingers tightened on the handle, veins bulging under weathered skin. Who's that? I asked, keeping my voice steady though my pulse hammered like a war drum. And don't say nobody. I've got bank statements, Dad. Big ones. Money you shouldn't have. He straightened then, slow and deliberate, like a bear rousing from a cave. He towered over me, broader, his flannel shirt stretched tight across shoulders that used to hoist me onto rooftops, his hair gray and thinning now, but those eyes cold, hard, the color of slate hadn't softened an inch. Where'd you get that? He asked, low and dangerous, a growl rumbling beneath the words. Eli, I said, stepping closer, closing the gap. He left it for me. Said you're dirty. Said there's proof. The air shifted, charged and heavy, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. He picked up the photo, studied it with a scowl, then tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the oil-stained floor like dead leaves. Eli was a dreamer, he said, turning back to the saw, his tone dismissive. Saw conspiracies in every shadow. You're smarter than that, Rowan. Am I? I snapped, slamming my hand on the bench, the tools rattling like bones. He finally met my gaze, eyes locking with mine. He's dead, Dad. Car crash, they say. But you and I both know that's horseshit. What did he find? What do you do? For a second, I thought he'd swing his fist clenched, veins popping, but then he laughed, a dry, hollow sound that crawled under my skin. You think I'd hurt my own son? You're unhinged, boy. Grief's messing with your head. Then explain the money. I shot back, voice rising, heat flooding my chest. Tens of thousands, funneled through some fake company. Explain the key to a storage unit I've never heard of. Explain why Eli told me not to trust you or Mom. That hit him. His eyes narrowed, just a flicker, but it was there, a crack in the stone. Your mother's got nothing to do with this, he said. Too quick, too defensive. So you do? I pounced, leaning in, my breath hot. What's in Unit 17, Dad? What's worth killing for? He grabbed my shirt then, fast as a snake, yanking me forward until I could smell the whiskey on his breath, sharp and sour. You listen? He growled, his grip iron. You don't know what you're digging into. Walk away, Rowan, for your own good. I shoved him off, stumbling back, chest heaving, blood roaring in my ears. Threatening me now? Real classy. It's a warning, he said, turning away, his voice dropping to a mutter. Last one you'll get. I didn't stay. Didn't need to. His hands were dirty, I could feel it. Taste it in the air. A filth that clung to every word. I stormed out, rain pelting me like icy needles, soaking through my jacket as I climbed into the Corolla, the engine coughing to life. My phone buzzed as I pulled away Lena, texting, You okay? I'm worried. I didn't reply. Couldn't. Not until I had more. Hello, everyone! Are you all still listening to this story? I'd be thrilled if you'd drop a comment below, letting me know where you're following this story from and how your day has been so far. Thank you very much. The storage unit was 10 minutes away, a squat row of rusted metal doors tucked off a back road, the kind of place secrets go to rot. Unit 1717's lock clicked open with Eli's key, the door groaning as I rolled it up, revealing a jackpot boxes of ledgers stacked like tombstones, bundles of cash wrapped in rubber bands, a laptop humming faintly in the damp air, a gun tucked in a small lockbox, its steel glinting dull under the flickering bulb I switched on. I flipped through a ledger, names, dates, payoffs, construction, contracts my ass. This was laundering. Big time. For someone named Vickers. The laptop booted up, password free, and there it was emails, encrypted but sloppy, linking Dad to a network. I couldn't fully map yet. A web of shadows stretching beyond Asheville. Eli had cracked it open, and it got him killed. I sat there on a crate, rain pounding the roof like a fist, the gun cold in my hand, heavier than I'd expected. Dad wasn't just a liar, he was a monster. Mom had covered for him. I'd seen it in her eyes, heard it in her broken admission. June, though, she didn't know. Not yet. But she'd get tangled in this, one way or another, and that gnawed at me almost as much as the rest. I drove back to the house one more time before dawn, the ridge shrouded in mist, the windows dark as dead eyes. The front door creaked as I slipped in, avoiding the kitchen where Mom might still be weeping over her onions. I headed for Dad's office, a cramped room off the hall, piled with blueprints and old ledgers, the kind he used to show me as a kid, bragging about building half of Asheville. Now I saw it for what it was, a front. I rifled through drawers, finding nothing but receipts and tax forms until I pried open a locked filing cabinet with a screwdriver from the garage. Inside was a single envelope, unmarked, sealed tight. I tore it open, a handwritten note from Dad, dated a week before Eli's death. He's on to us. I'll handle it. Don't push this. My stomach lurched. Proof Dad knew Eli was closing in. Proof he'd tried to handle it. I stuffed it in my jacket, locked the cabinet, and slipped out, the house's silence heavier than ever. Back at my apartment, I texted Lena, "Meet me tomorrow. I need you." Then I locked the unit's hall in my trunk, the gun still with me, and drove into the night, the weight of it all settling like lead. Hurt was gone. Now it was war. The storage unit felt like a crypt when I returned past midnight. October 25, the air thick with dust and the sour tang of secrets as I hunched over the laptop, its blue glow casting eerie shadows across the concrete walls. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but a damp chill seeped into my bones. The gun resting on a box beside me, its presence a quiet threat, a dark promise I wasn't sure I'd keep. I'd spent hours digging through the ledgers, cross-referencing names and dates with the emails flickering on the screen. Vickers. Richard Vickers, a construction baron in Raleigh. But the numbers screamed crime, millions washed through fake projects, a river of filth Dad had channeled for years. Eli had found the thread that unraveled it all, and they'd snuffed him out for it. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes, the ache behind them throbbing like a heartbeat. The plan was taking shape, jagged and raw, but clear as the mountains through a break in the fog. Dad didn't just deserve to lose everything he needed to feel it, bone deep, the way I felt Eli's absence clawing at me. His money, his reputation, his freedom, I'd strip it all away, piece by bloody piece. And Mom? If she'd covered for him, she'd fall too. I didn't want to believe she'd known from the start, but her shaky words in the kitchen? I left him a note he never saw, echoed, a confession I couldn't unhear. Step 1, expose the money trail. The ledgers were dynamite detailed enough to bury Dad if they hit the right hands, cops or feds who couldn't look away. Step 2, hunt Vickers. He was the puppet master, Dad just a string. Cut him loose, and the whole operation might collapse like a house of cards in a storm. Step 3, make it personal. Dad loved his image, gruff mountain man, self-made, untouchable. I'd shatter that, drag his name through Asheville's mud until the town spat it out like poison. The how was the hitch. I wasn't a hacker, wasn't a lawyer I poured beers for a living, for Christ's sake. But I had the evidence, and I had rage, a furnace burning hot enough to fuel a war. I'd start here, catalog everything, every dollar, every name, then figure out who to trust. Lena's face flashed in my mind, her offer to help hanging between us like smoke curling from a dying fire. I needed her, but letting her in meant risking her too, and the thought twisted my gut into knots. I'd lost Eli, losing her too wasn't an option, but I couldn't do this alone. Not all of it. I packed the laptop, gun, and a stack of ledgers into a duffel bag, the weight of it slumping against my shoulder as I locked. Unit 17 behind me. The night was still, mountains a dark silhouette against a starless sky, the air sharp with pine and wet earth, a scent that used to mean home, but now just mocked me. Back at my apartment, I spread it all out again, sketching a timeline on a crumpled napkin, dates of deposits. Meetings, Eli's last weeks. One stood out. October 15, a week before he died. A drop-off, $200,000, marked Asheville Overlook. I knew that spot, a pull-off on 74 with a view of the valley, a place Eli and I used to hike to, watching hawks wheel overhead. Had he been there? Seen something? The buzzer rang, sharp and jarring, snapping me out of it. It was Lena, her voice crackling through the intercom, edged with impatience. "Let me up, Rowan. We need to talk." I buzzed her in, heart thudding, and she appeared at the door, her tattooed arms bare under a leather jacket, eyes fierce as a hawk's. "You texted me," she said, stepping inside, her boots leaving faint wet prints on the floor. "Said you needed me. So, what's the plan?" I hesitated, the duffel bag half open on the floor, papers spilling like guts. "You sure you want in? This isn't a game, Lena. It's ugly." She knelt beside it, pulling out a ledger, her fingers tracing the numbers with a steady calm that unnerved me. "Eli was family to me too," she said, voice low, resolute. "If your dad or whoever did this, I'm not sitting it out. Tell me what you're doing." So I laid it out, exposed the money, Hunt Vickers, ruined Dad. Every step, every jagged edge of it. She listened, quiet, her dark eyes flicking over the evidence, then nodded slow. "You'll need more than this," she said, stacking the pages with care. "Proof's one thing, getting it out there's another. I know a guy, Jasper. Runs a blog, digs into corruption. He'd eat this up. Trustworthy?" I asked, skeptical, my fingers drumming the counter. "Enough," she said, meeting my gaze. "And I've got a scanner at the shop. We can digitize this, spread it if we need to, make it impossible to bury." It was a start, a real one, solid as stone. I felt the shift then, from blind fury to something sharper, colder resolve, a blade honed and ready. Lena was in, and that changed everything. But as she sat there, her knee brushing mine, the faint scent of lavender cutting through the stale air, I couldn't shake the dread that I'd just painted a target on her back too. "Okay," I said, voice rough. "Tomorrow we move." She nodded, and for a moment I saw the girl who'd walked away 6 months ago, not because she didn't love me, but because I wouldn't let her in. Now she was here, and I wasn't sure I deserved it. Morning broke gray and heavy over Asheville, the mountains draped in a fog so dense it swallowed the trees whole, their outlines ghostly against the bruised sky. I met Lena at her tattoo shop downtown, Ink and Ash, a narrow storefront wedged between a coffee roaster and a vintage record store, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the damp air. Inside, the place hummed with her walls plastered with her art, dragons and skulls and roses bleeding black ink, the air thick with antiseptic, and the sharp bite of tattoo ink, a scent that clung to her like a second skin. She was at the counter, scanning pages from the ledger with a focus that made her look unbreakable, her brow furrowed under the dim light of a hanging lamp. "Jasper's on his way," she said without looking up, her voice cutting through the soft hum of the scanner. "He's nosy as hell, but good. Broke a story last year about a city council guy skimming funds got him canned. I nodded, pacing the hardwood floor, my boots scuffing the polish, leaving faint trails in the dust. The gun was tucked in my waistband, hidden under my jacket, a cold, heavy comfort I wasn't sure I'd use but couldn't leave behind. What did you tell him? I asked, pausing by a sketch of a raven, its wings spread wide. Just enough, she said, stacking the scans into a neat pile. Dirty money, big names, proof. He'll want to see it himself. I didn't love it handing this off to some blogger I didn't know, but Lena was right. I needed reach, someone who could amplify the evidence without me walking into a precinct blind. Not yet. The feds could come later, once I'd done the real damage. Jasper showed up 10 minutes later, a wiry guy in his 30s with a patchy beard and a laptop bag slung over his shoulder, reeking of cigarettes and cheap cologne that hit me like a slap. His eyes darted around, ferret-like, taking in the shop, then me. This the whistleblower? He asked Lena, jerking his chin my way with a smirk. Something like that, I said, crossing my arms, sizing him up. You got a way to get this out there? Fast? He grinned, teeth crooked and yellowed. If it's juicy, yeah. Show me. I slid the duffel across the counter, watching his face as he flipped through the ledgers, then fired up the laptop to skim the emails. His grin faded, replaced by a hungry glint that made me uneasy. Holy shit, he muttered, scratching his beard. This is mob-level stuff. Who's Vickers? That's what I want to know, I said, leaning in. Can you dig? Already on it, he said, pulling out his own laptop, fingers flying over the keys. Give me a day. I'll cross-check names, see what sticks. You want this public, though. I need a hook, something personal. Like what? Lena asked, stepping closer, her shoulder brushing mine. Like a dead brother, Jasper said, glancing at me, his tone blunt. Car crash cover-up? That's gold. Ties it together. I clenched my jaw, the words slicing deeper than I'd expected, a fresh cut over an old wound. Fine, I said, voice tight. Use it. Just don't name me yet. He nodded, typing furiously, and I stepped outside for air. The street alive with the clatter of life tourists huddled under umbrellas, the twang of a busker's guitar echoing off wet brick, the rich, roasted scent of coffee drifting from next door, curling into the damp air like a promise. Lena followed, her hand brushing my arm, light but steady. You okay with this? She asked, her voice soft but piercing through the noise. No, I admitted, staring at the mountains, their peaks lost in the fog. But it's a start. Jasper's step one. Next is Vickers, the first need to see him, face to face. Figure out how deep Dad's in. She frowned, worry creasing her brow, her dark eyes searching mine. That's risky, Rowan. If he's connected, he's dangerous. So's Dad. I shot back, the words bitter on my tongue. And he's still walking around like nothing happened. She didn't argue, just stood there, her presence grounding me in a way I hated needing but couldn't deny. I'm driving you, she said finally, decisive. Tomorrow. Raleigh's 4 hours. You're not going alone. I wanted to say no, keep her safe, shield her from the fire I was about to light, but the look in her eyes, fierce, unyielding, stopped me cold. Fine, I muttered, shoving my hands in my pockets. But we're careful. Back inside, Jasper was packing up, promising a draft by morning. I handed him a burner phone number, no trace to me, and he left with half the scans tucked under his arm. The rest locked in Lena's safe behind the counter, a steel box bolted to the floor. The plan was rolling now, but obstacles loomed like storm clouds Dad could find out. Mom could crack, Vickers could be a ghost. And June she'd called twice that day, her voice sharp through the line, asking why I'd missed Eli's memorial prep, why I hadn't answered her texts. She didn't know yet, but she'd feel this soon, and I wasn't sure how to shield her from the fallout. That night, I dreamed of Eli, his voice echoing in the dark, low and urgent. Fix this, Rowan. I woke drenched in sweat, the gun still by my bed, the resolve hardening into steel, A blade I'd wield until it broke. Or I did. The overlook on Highway 74 was a ghost town at dusk, the valley below swallowed by deepening shadows as the sun bled orange into the horizon, its light fracturing through the pines. Lena's truck idled behind me, a low growl against the stillness, her silhouette stark against the headlights' glare. October 26, the day I'd circled in red on that napkin, now crumpled in my pocket. The ledger marked it clear. $200,000 changed hands here, a week before Eli died. I needed to know why, needed to feel the truth in the dirt under my boots. The gravel crunched as I paced the pull-off, the wind whipping my jacket, tugging at the duffel slung over my shoulder. I scanned for clues, a tire mark etched in the mud, a cigarette butt crushed into the asphalt. Anything to anchor the suspicion gnawing at me. Nothing stood out. Just pine needles scattered like confetti and cracked pavement glinting wet from the day's rain. But the place felt wrong, heavy, like it held a memory it wouldn't share. Eli's car had gone off 5 miles down the road, close enough to connect, far enough to blur. I closed my eyes, picturing him here, standing where I stood, meeting someone Dad, Vickers, maybe both. Had he confronted them? Threatened to blow it wide open? Lena's door slammed, the sound sharp in the quiet, and she joined me, her breath fogging in the cold, her boots crunching beside mine. Anything? She asked, hands shoved deep in her pockets, her voice steady but edged with the same tension I felt. Not yet, I said, kicking a rock over the edge, watching it tumble into the dark, silent as a secret. But this is where it started. I can feel it, Lena. She nodded, quiet, then pulled out her phone, the screen's glow cutting through the dusk. Jasper texted, she said, scrolling. He's got a lead. Vickers is Richard Vickers, CEO of Vickers Construction. Big player in Raleigh, ties to shady deals. He's running a fundraiser tomorrow night, downtown. Could be your shot. Adrenaline spiked, a hot rush under my skin. Where? Some hotel Pinnacle, I think. Fancy shit suits, champagne, the works. Jasper's working the blog post, tying your dad to it. Goes live tomorrow unless you say no. No, I said fast, shaking my head. Not yet. I need Vickers first. See what he knows. She studied me, worry creasing her brow, her lips parting like she wanted to argue. You're walking into a lion's den, Rowan. You've got no backup, no plan pass and talk to him. I've got you, I said, half smiling despite the weight, trying to lighten it. And this. I patted the duffel, the gun's weight a silent partner inside. She didn't laugh, her eyes narrowing. That's not enough. We need more intel. Leverage. Let me call Jasper, get him to dig deeper before we go. I nodded, reluctant but trusting her instincts, and she stepped away to make the call, her voice a low murmur against the wind. I stayed at the edge, staring into the valley, the breeze carrying the faint, mournful howl of a distant train through the pines. That's when I saw it, a glint in the dirt, half buried under a scraggly shrub. I crouched, brushing the soil aside with my fingers, and pulled out a key fob, Toyota logo scratched but unmistakable. Eli's car. My chest tightened, breath catching as I closed my fist around it, the cold metal biting into my palm like a truth. I couldn't deny. This was no accident. He'd been here, right here, and someone had staged the crash to cover it. Lena came back, phone in hand, her steps slowing as she saw my face. Jasper says, Vickers has a silent partner, someone local, she said, then paused. What's that? Eli's, I said, holding it up, voice shaking with fury. They killed him here. This proves it. Her eyes widened, then hardened, a mirror to my own rage. Okay, she said, decisive. Tomorrow, we hit the fundraiser. But we're smart fake names. Cash only, no tracks. We drove back in silence, the fob burning a hole in my pocket, a talisman of vengeance. I couldn't let go. At her shop, we scanned the last ledgers, the machine's hum filling the quiet, packed burner laptop with a cracked case, mapped the hotel on a creased printout from her ancient printer. Before we left the Overlook, I'd sent Vickers an email from a dummy account I'd set up on the laptop. I know about the Overlook. You can't hide it! A jab, a spark to make him twitch, maybe slip before I faced him. The blog post was the first strike, timed for after I got what I needed from him. I'd confront him, record it if I could, then let Jasper blow the lid off. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Lena crashed on my couch, her steady breathing a fragile tether in the dark, her presence a comfort I didn't deserve but clung to. I lay awake, the gun under my pillow, its cold steel pressing into my resolve. The plan was set, but the cost crept in. What if Vickers fought back? What if Dad did? I gripped the grip, tracing its edges, the furnace of my anger flaring brighter. This was just the beginning. The Raleigh skyline glittered like a jagged crown. As Lena's truck rolled into the city, the hum of the highway fading into the buzz of downtown streets, alive with neon and noise. It was October 27, 2024, and the air carried a crisp edge, laced with exhaust and the faint perfume of wealth that hung over the high rises. The Pinnacle Hotel loomed ahead, a sleek tower of glass and steel piercing the dusk, its lobby glowing gold through tinted windows, a beacon of excess. Vickers' fundraiser pulsed upstairs, a masquerade of suits and smiles cloaking the rot I'd come to rip open. I adjusted the burner phone in my pocket, its edges digging into my thigh, the gun tucked under my jacket, a secret weight against my ribs. I glanced at Lena in the driver's seat, her hands steady on the wheel. You ready? She asked, her voice tight but calm, a thread of steel beneath it. She'd traded her hoodie for a simple black dress, its hem brushing her knees, her tattoos peeking out like whispers of defiance. We'd drilled it a dozen times. Fake names. I was James Carter. She was Lily Reed. Cash for the valet. No real IDs. The plan: slip in, find Vickers, get him talking, record it. Jasper's post was cued, a bomb ready to drop once I had something concrete. Yeah, I said, though my pulse thrummed a different tune, a war drum. I couldn't silence. Let's do this. We handed the truck to a valet in a crisp vest, his gloved hands brushing mine as he took the keys, and stepped into the lobby. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers dripping light like molten gold, the air heavy with polished wood and the cloying scent of expensive cologne. A world so far from Asheville's grit, it felt like a lie. A doorman in a tailored suit checked our invitation, a forged QR code. Lena had whipped up on her laptop, her fingers dancing over the keys with a precision. I envied and waved us to the elevator with a curt nod. My boots felt clumsy on the plush carpet, each step a thudding countdown, the gun's weight shifting with every breath. The ballroom on the 20th floor was a sea of black ties and sequins, laughter and clinking glasses slicing through the hum of a string quartet tucked in the corner, their bows sawing out a melody too delicate for the filth I was chasing. I scanned the crowd, heart pounding against my ribs, until I spotted him, Richard Vickers. Mid-50s, slicked back hair graying at the temples, a navy suit tailored to his broad frame. He stood near a bar of polished oak, shaking hands with a cluster of suits, his smile all teeth and no soul, a predator's grin. I nudged Lena, nodding his way. That's him, I muttered, voice low under the chatter. Stay close, but not too close. She squeezed my arm, her fingers warm through my sleeve, then melted into the crowd, her dark hair a beacon. I'd track if shit hit the fan. I grabbed a whiskey from a passing tray, liquid courage, its burn steadying my nerves and made my move, weaving through the throng, the phone in my pocket primed to record. Mr. Vickers, I said, pitching my voice low, casual, like I belonged. James Carter. Big fan of your work. He turned, sizing me up with gray eyes sharp as knives, cutting through the dim light. Do I know you? His voice was smooth, practiced, but there was an edge, a blade hidden in silk. Not yet, I said, forcing a grin, my pulse a jackhammer. Heard you're the man behind half of Raleigh's skyline. Takes guts and good partners. He chuckled, sipping his drink, a crystal tumbler glinting in his hand. Partners are key. You in the business? Something like that, I said, leaning in just enough, the phone catching every word. Heard. You've got a guy in Asheville Keller? Runs a tight ship. His smile faltered, just a flicker, but I caught it, a crack in the mask. Keller, huh? Small world. What's your interest? Curiosity, I lied, the whiskey sour on my tongue. Word is, he's got some creative accounting. Big deposits, off-book stuff. You ever see that kind of thing? His grip tightened on the glass, knuckles whitening, jaw ticking like a clock winding down. You're asking questions you shouldn't, Carter, he said, voice dropping cold. Who sent you? Nobody, I said, stepping closer, heat rising in my chest. Just a guy who lost a brother. Car crash. Funny thing found his key fob at a drop-off spot. Your name was on the paperwork. The air shifted, heavy and electric, a storm about to break. He set his drink down. Slow, deliberate, his eyes locking on mine like a hunter's. Walk away, kid, he said, low and lethal. You don't know what you're stepping in. I know enough, I shot back, voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Eli Keller. My brother. You remember him? He froze, then smirked. Cold and cruel, a slash across his face. You're a dead man walking, just like him. Should have stayed in the mountains. Before I could react, he nodded to someone behind me, a hulking guy in a suit. Moving fast, his shadow swallowing the light. I ducked, adrenaline surging like fire, and bolted for Lena. The crowd parted, confused murmurs rising, as she grabbed my hand, her grip fierce, pulling me toward the stairs. Go! She hissed, her dress tearing at the hem as we ran. We hit the stairwell, footsteps pounding behind us, my breath ragged, the recording gold if we made it out. The first twist hit me then. Dad wasn't just a pawn. Vickers feared him or what he could say. This was bigger than I'd thought, and we were running straight into it. The stairwell echoed with our boots slamming concrete, fluorescent lights flickering like a bad dream, casting jagged shadows that danced on the walls. Lena was ahead, her dress bunched in one hand, the other gripping the rail as we spiraled down from the 20th floor, her breathing sharp and fast. My lungs burned, the gun digging into my ribs with every step, the phone still recording in my pocket, capturing the chaos. Vickers' thug was close, too close, his heavy steps thundering above us, a relentless shadow growing larger with every turn. I didn't look back, didn't dare, just kept moving, the taste of whiskey and fear sharp on my tongue, a bitter mix that fueled me. Rowan, faster! Lena yelled, her voice slicing through the panic, urgent and raw. We hit the 10th floor, slamming through a fire door into a service hallway, gray walls, scuffed linoleum, the hum of a vending machine buzzing like a trapped fly. She yanked me left, toward a freight elevator, her fingers digging into my arm, bruising. In here! She snapped, shoving me inside. We stumbled in, the doors grinding shut, just as the thug's silhouette loomed in the doorway, his fist pounding once before we were gone. The elevator lurched upward wrong direction, but away, and I slumped against the wall, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. Lena punched the stop button, the car jolting to a halt between floors, a dim red light bathing us in crimson, turning her pale face ghostly. You get it? She asked, breathless, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. I pulled the phone out, hands shaking, and stopped the recording. The screen's glow harsh in the dark. Yeah, I said, voice rough. He admitted it, Eli, the crash. Not details, but enough. I played it back, Vickers' voice tinny but clear through the static. You're a dead man walking, just like him. My stomach twisted, rage flaring anew, a fire that wouldn't die. He's scared, Lena said, leaning in to listen, her shoulder brushing mine. That nod, he's got muscle on speed dial. We're not safe here. No shit, I muttered, shoving the phone back in my pocket, the weight of it a lifeline. But it's not just him, he said. Should have stayed in the mountains. Dad's not a middleman, he's a threat to Vickers. Maybe he's got leverage. Something bigger. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, piecing it together with me. You think your dad double-crossed him? Maybe, I said, the idea clicking into place like a loaded chamber. Eli found out, confronted Dad, and Vickers cleaned it up. Or Dad did, and Vickers is covering his ass. Before she could reply, the elevator jolted, lights flickering back to green, the hum of machinery kicking in. Someone was overriding it. Shit! I hissed, drawing the gun, its grip slick in my sweaty palm. Stay behind me. The doors slid open on the 15th floor, and there he was, Dad, not Vickers' thug, standing in a navy overcoat, his face a mask of fury and something else, guilt, raw and bleeding. My heart stopped, then kicked into overdrive, a wild thing caged in my ribs. Rowan, he growled, stepping forward, his boots heavy on the tile. Put that damn thing down. I didn't. I aimed it at his chest, hands steady despite the tremor in my voice, the barrel unwavering. You here to finish what Vickers started? He froze, eyes flicking to Lena, then back to me, his jaw tight as iron. You don't understand, he said, voice low, cracked. I didn't want this. Want what? I snapped, stepping out, the muzzle inches from him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. Eli dead? Me next? Explain it, Dad. Now. He sighed, shoulders slumping, and for the first time, he looked old, worn thin, cracked, like the cedar planks he'd once nailed together. Vickers runs a syndicate, money, drugs, whatever pays, he said, the words spilling slow, heavy. I cooked the books, kept it quiet. Eli snooped, found the storage unit. I told him to drop it, but he wouldn't listen. Vickers. He trailed off, jaw clenched, eyes dropping to the floor. Vickers killed him. I finished, voice shaking with the weight of it, the gun trembling now. And you let it happen. I didn't know, he roared, fists clenching, his voice booming in the narrow hall. Not until after. I thought I could protect you, I'll keep it buried. I've tried repairing this, Rowan, but you're digging, and you're gonna get us all killed. Lena stepped forward, fierce as a storm. You buried it, she said, her voice cutting like glass. Eli's blood's on you. Dad flinched, a crack in his armor, and I saw it then, the second twist. He wasn't just complicit. He'd tried to shield us, botched it, and lost Eli anyway. The note in his office, I'll handle it, flashed in my mind, a plea to Vickers that went wrong. You're done, I said, low, the gun steadying as resolve hardened over the hurt. I've got Vickers on tape. Jasper's posting it tonight. You're both finished. His eyes widened, panic breaking through the stone. Rowan, don't, he pleaded, voice rising. Vickers will burn everything your mother, good. I cut him off, stepping back into the elevator with Lena, my finger still on the trigger guard. Let it burn. The doors shut on his stunned face, his hands reaching out too late, and we dropped to the garage, my mind racing. Dad wasn't the mastermind, he was a cog, a coward who'd tried to fix his mess and failed. Vickers was the head, but Dad's confession shifted the plan. I'd ruin them both, and I'd do it with their own words. The garage was a concrete labyrinth, dimly lit by flickering bulbs, the air thick with oil and dampness as Lena and I burst out of the elevator, our boots echoing in the cavernous space. Her truck was parked near the exit, keys jangling in her hand as we ran, my soles slipping on the slick floor, the gun bouncing against my side. The recording burned in my pocket, Dad's voice. I didn't know until after, looping with Vickers' dead man walking, a double-edged blade. I'd wheeled to the end. We reached the truck, piling in, and Lena peeled out, tires squealing as we hit the ramp to the street, the city's lights flashing past in a blur of neon and glass. My phone buzzed as we merged onto the highway. Jasper, posts live. Vickers linked to Keller, crash cover up. Feds tipped. You're viral. I grinned, dark and sharp, the first real wind cutting through the chaos like a blade through flesh. Step 1 done. Head for Asheville, I said, checking the gun's clip 6 rounds untouched, gleaming in the dashboard light. We need to get to Mom before Vickers does. Lena nodded, her eyes fixed on the road, the truck's engine growling as we sped west. You think she's in danger? If Dad's right, yeah, I said, staring out at the dark, the highway unspooling like a black ribbon through the night. Vickers'll tie up loose ends. She knows too much. The drive was tense, headlights slicing through fog that clung to the road like a shroud, the mountains looming as we crossed back into familiar territory. I called June, no answer, just her voicemail, her voice bright and oblivious. I tried Mom's phone, straight to nothing, dead or off, a silence that screamed louder than any words. My gut clenched, dread pooling cold and heavy. We hit Asheville at 2 a.m., the ridge rising dark and silent, the house a hulking shadow against the moonless sky. No lights, no movement too quiet, a stillness that prickled my skin. I grabbed the gun, motioning Lena to stay back, but she followed anyway, her jaw set, her boots soft on the gravel. The front door was ajar, splintered at the lock, wood shards scattered like teeth. My breath caught as I stepped inside, the familiar smell of cedar and Mom's lavender candles undercut by something metallic, sharp blood, fresh and wet. The living room was a wreck couch overturned, glass shattered across the hardwood, a lamp flickering on the floor, its bulb buzzing like a dying insect. Then I saw her mom, slumped against the kitchen island, a gash on her temple oozing red, blood pooling dark and sticky beneath her, staining the tiles. Mom! I dropped to my knees beside her, hands shaking as I checked her pulse weak, thready, but there, a faint thread of life. Lena grabbed a dish towel from the counter, pressing it to the wound, her face pale but focused, her hands steady where mine weren't. She's alive, she said, voice tight, urgent. Call 911. I fumbled for my phone, dialing with numb fingers. The operator's calm questions a blur as I barked our address, my voice cracking. Hurry. She's bleeding bad. Lena's eyes met mine, fierce and unyielding. Vickers or Dad, I said, rage boiling over, a tide I couldn't hold back. Either way, they're dead. Mom stirred, a groan escaping her lips, her eyes fluttering open, unfocused, glassy with pain. Rowan, he came. Her voice was a rasp, barely audible over the pounding in my ears. Who? I demanded, gripping her hand, her skin cold against mine. Dad? Vickers? Both, she whispered, tears mixing with the blood streaking her face. Your father tried to stop him. Vickers shot. My world tilted, a vertigo of fury and disbelief. I bolted to the back door, gun raised, its weight steadying me as I scanned the yard. Dad's truck sat crooked in the grass, driver's door flung open, a trail of blood glinting wet in the dim light. Leading to the shed, I ran, Lena shouting behind me, Rowan, wait! But I couldn't stop, my boots pounding the earth. I kicked the shed door in, wood splintering, and froze. Dad sprawled on the floor, a bullet hole in his chest, blood soaking his flannel. His eyes glassy, fixed on nothing. Vickers stood over him, pistol in hand, his suit stained red, his face twisted in a snarl. You! He spat, turning, raising the gun, but I was faster. I fired once, twice chest and shoulder, the shots deafening in the tight space, and he dropped, screaming, his weapon clattering away across the concrete. I stood over him, barrel aimed at his head, finger trembling on the trigger, blood pooling beneath him, dark and thick. His eyes met mine, wide with pain and hate, and for a split second, I saw Eli laughing, alive, and wondered if he'd want this, want me stained with this man's life. My hand shook, the gun heavy, my breath ragged. Rowan, don't! Lena yelled, grabbing my arm, her voice cutting through the haze like a lifeline. Cops are coming. He's done. I wanted to pull it, end him, let the fire consume us both. But her grip, her words, held me back. Sirens wailed in the distance, closing in fast, red and blue flashing through the shed's grimy window. Vickers groaned, clutching his wounds, blood bubbling between his fingers, and I lowered the gun, stepping back, the world spinning around me. Dad was dead, his last act a botched stand against the monster he'd fed. Mom was hurt, clinging to life. The climax had blown apart, and I'd won, but at what cost? The shed's walls seemed to close in, the air thick with death, as the sirens grew louder, piercing the fog that blanketed Asheville at 2:30 a.m. on October 28. Vickers lay crumpled, blood seeping from his chest and shoulder, his breath shallow and wet. A dying animal. Dad's body glowed sickly under the lantern's yellow light, his face slack, the man I'd known reduced to a shell. The gun hung heavy in my hand, barrel warm from the shots, gunpowder stinging my nose, acrid and sharp. Lena stood beside me, her hand still on my arm, her grip the only thing tethering me to the ground as the world blurred at the edges. "Rowan," she said, low, urgent, her voice a thread in the chaos. "We need to move. Cops'll be here any second." I nodded, numb, letting her pull me out, the cold night air hitting me like a slap, cutting through the haze. The gun slipped from my fingers, landing in the wet grass with a dull thud, abandoned. Paramedics rushed through the front door as we reached the house, their shouts muffled, red and blue lights pulsing across the yard like a heartbeat. Mom was on a stretcher, oxygen mask strapped to her face, her blood-matted hair stark against the white sheet, her chest rising shallow, but steady. "She's stable," one said, glancing at me, his face grim under a cap. "Head trauma, but she's conscious. We're taking her to Mission Hospital." I managed a nod, words lodged in my throat, and watched them wheel her out, the stretcher's wheels rattling on the gravel. Cops swarmed in next uniforms, flashlights, barked orders slicing the night. One grabbed me, a stocky guy with a buzz cut, his hand firm on my shoulder, his breath smelling of coffee and mint. "You, Keller?" What the hell happened here? "Self-defense," I said, flat, pointing toward the shed, my voice distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Vickers shot my dad, tried to kill my mom. I stopped him." He squinted, skeptical, his pen hovering over a notepad, but Lena stepped in, fierce as ever. "It's true," she said, her voice cutting through his doubt. "I saw it." Vickers broke in, attacked her. Rowan saved her life. The cop grunted, jotting notes, his flashlight beam dancing across my face, then waved us to sit on the porch steps. My legs gave out anyway, the adrenaline crashing hard, leaving me hollow, a husk staring into the chaos. Lena sat beside me, her knee pressed against mine, a silent anchor as cops taped off the shed with yellow ribbon. Medics hauled. Vickers out on another stretcher, his curses muffled by pain, and the oxygen mask clamped over his face. He'd live, they said, his wounds bad but not fatal. Good. I wanted him to rot in a cell, not slip away into a grave where he couldn't feel it. Jasper's blog had done its job. The post hit at midnight, and by dawn, the feds were sniffing around, tipped off by the viral storm. Vickers' syndicate, Dad's laundering, Eli's crash, all laid bare for the world to see. The recording from the fundraiser sealed it. My phone handed over to a grim-faced agent in a cheap suit who muttered justice like it meant something. But justice tasted like ash in my mouth, dry and bitter. Dad was dead, Mom broken. Eli still gone. I'd won, hadn't I? So why did it feel like I'd lost everything that mattered? June screeched into the drive an hour later, her SUVs, tires spitting gravel, her face a mask of shock as she leapt out and ran toward me, her coat flapping in the wind. "Rowan, what the fuck?" she yelled, tears streaking her cheeks, her voice cracking like ice under a boot. "Mom called me from the ambulance, said Dad's dead." Some guy attacked her. What did you do? I stood, unsteady, meeting her wild eyes, her hair a tangled mess from the drive. I found out the truth, June, I said, voice low, worn. Dad was dirty. Vickers killed Eli. I made them pay. She slapped me, hard, the sting sharp against the numbness, her palm leaving a red echo on my cheek. You made them pay? She spat, trembling. You dragged us into this. Mom's in the hospital because of you. Lena stood, stepping between us, her presence a wall. He didn't drag anyone, she said. Fierce. Your dad did. Rowan stopped it. June glared, her breath hitching, then collapsed against me, sobbing into my chest, her fists pounding weak against my jacket. I held her, mechanical, my own tears locked somewhere deep, unreachable. The cost was clear now, family fractured, blood spilled, a victory that tasted like defeat, like ashes on my tongue. The cops let us go after statements, no charges yet, but the agent's warning lingered. This ain't over, Keller. Stay put. Back at my apartment, Lena patched a cut on my hand I hadn't noticed, her touch gentle but firm, her fingers stained with Mom's blood. You did it, she said, quiet, her eyes searching mine. They're done. Yeah, I muttered, staring at the wall, the peeling paint a map of nowhere. But what's left? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The ashes of my revenge smoldered around us, and I couldn't see through the smoke, couldn't find a way out. The hospital room smelled of bleach and despair, a sterile tang that clung to the back of my throat as I sat beside Mom's bed, the chair's plastic creaking under me. It was October 29, late afternoon. The sky outside Mission Hospital a dull gray, heavy with the promise of more rain. Tubes snaked from her arm to a beeping machine, her breathing shallow but steady, a rhythm that felt fragile as glass. She'd woken that morning, lucid enough to talk, and I'd been dreading this moment since, the weight of it pressing on my chest. Lena waited in the hall, giving me space, though I could feel her through the glass, a lifeline I didn't deserve, but needed. Mom's eyes fluttered open, pale blue and clouded, locking on me with a clarity that cut. Rowan, she croaked, voice raspy from the tube they'd pulled out, her lips cracked and dry. You're here? Yeah, I said, leaning forward, elbows digging into my knees, hands clasped tight. How you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, she said, a weak smile flickering, then fading fast. Your father? He's really gone? I nodded, throat tight, the words sticking. Vickers shot him. In the shed. I shot Vickers. He's alive, locked up. Feds have everything. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, tracing a path through the bruises blooming purple under her skin. I knew, she whispered, so soft I almost missed it. About the money. Not Eli, not at first. Your dad said it was old debts, construction stuff gone bad. I didn't ask. Should have. When Eli started digging, I begged him to stop. I left a note under his door once. Stay out of it, Eli. For us's, but he never saw it. I was too scared to push harder. The confession hit like a fist, deeper with that detail, a shard of glass twisting in my gut. Why'd you cover for him? I asked, voice low, steady, though my hands clenched the chair arms, knuckles whitening. To protect you, she said, eyes opening, pleading, wet with guilt. You and June and Eli. He swore it'd stay buried, that Vickers wouldn't touch us. When Eli died, I didn't know, not until after. I thought I was keeping us safe. I stood, pacing to the window, the city sprawling below Asheville's quirky streets, the mountains beyond, all blurred by rage and grief, a red haze. I couldn't blink away. You let him lie, I said, turning back, my voice rising despite myself. You let Vickers walk into our house, put a gun to your head. Eli's blood's on both of you. She flinched, sobbing softly, her hands twisting the thin hospital blanket. I'm sorry, she choked out, voice breaking. I thought I was doing right by you. Right? I snapped, the word a lash. Eli's dead. Dad's dead. You're here. That's not right, Mom. That's a fucking graveyard. She didn't answer, just cried. The sound small and broken, and I hated myself for it, but not enough to stop. Not enough to soften the truth cutting us both. I stormed out, the door banging shut behind me, the sound echoing down the sterile hall. Lena was there, catching my arm, her eyes searching mine, steady where I was unraveling. You okay? No, I said, pulling away, heading for the elevator, my boots loud on the tile. She knew, Lena, all along, and she let it happen. We hit the parking lot, the air cold and damp, rain threatening again. She's not Vickers, Lena said, firm, following me to the Corolla. She's not your dad. She messed up, Rowan, but she didn't pull the trigger. Doesn't matter, I muttered, unlocking the car, the key scraping the lock. She's part of it. They all are. June was waiting at my apartment, sitting on the couch with a mug of coffee gone cold, her kids' voices faint from a cartoon playing on her phone, a tinny distraction. She looked up, exhausted, no fight left in her eyes, just shadows. Feds called, she said, voice flat. They're seizing the house, bank accounts, everything. Dad's business, it's all tied to Vickers. We're broke, Rowan. I sank into a chair, the weight settling heavier, a stone on my chest. Good, I said, hollow, staring at the floor. Let it burn. She stared at me, then shook her head. Slow, like she was seeing me for the first time. You got your revenge, she said, bitter. Happy now? No, I admitted, meeting her gaze, her eyes red-rimmed and accusing. But Eli's not a ghost anymore. They can't hide it. She nodded, slow, a truce forming in the silence. Fragile, but there. She'd tipped Dad off. I realized those calls about the memorial, her questions, she'd mentioned me digging, and he'd known. It wasn't her fault. Not really. But it had set this in motion, and now we were all paying. That night, I climbed to the roof of my building, the city lights flickering below like scattered stars, the mountains a dark wall against the sky, their peaks lost in the haze. Lena joined me, a blanket around her shoulders, her warmth pressing into my side. A quiet comfort I didn't push away. What now? She asked, her voice soft, carrying on the wind. I don't know, I said, the breeze snatching my words, scattering them. But it's over, for Eli. She took my hand, her fingers threading through mine, and I let her, the weight of truth crushing but shared. For the first time in days, I breathed, the air cold and clean, cutting through the ash. November 1, 2024, dawned cold and clear, the Blue Ridge Mountains sharp against a sky scrubbed clean. By last night's rain, their ridges etched in crisp lines of pine and stone. I stood at Eli's grave, a simple slab in a quiet cemetery off 74, the earth still fresh over him, a wound not yet healed. The headstone read, Elijah Keller, 1998-2024, beloved son and brother, carved in granite too small, for the life he'd been, too plain for the light he'd carried. I'd brought his guitar, the one he'd strummed off key with that lopsided grin, and leaned it against the stone, its strings catching the morning sun in faint glints of gold. No flowers, just that, raw and real, a piece of him I couldn't bury. Lena waited back at the truck, its engine idling soft in the distance, her silhouette a steady shadow against the dawn. Mom was still in the hospital, healing slow, her silence a wall I wasn't ready to climb. June had taken her kids back to Charlotte, promising to call, though I doubted she would. Her last look at me heavy, with something between blame and resignation. The feds had Vickers in custody, his empire crumbling under an avalanche of indictments, money laundering, murder, racketeering, a litany of sins spilling out. The blog post had sparked a firestorm, reporters hounding me until I ditched my phone for a new number. A clean slate I didn't feel. Dad's death was ruled a homicide. No charges for me, self-defense, they said. The paperwork stamped and filed. Clean, legal, empty. I knelt, tracing Eli's name with my finger, the stone cold and unyielding under my touch, a finality I couldn't argue with. I got him, Eli, I whispered, voice cracking, the wind stealing the sound. Vickers, Dad, they paid. Wish you'd seen it. The pines rustled, a low moan threading through the branches, an answer I wanted to believe in. I'd avenged him, torn the family apart to do it, and now the grudge was gone, replaced by a quiet. I didn't know how to fill a void where the fire had burned out. Revenge had been ablaze, hot and fast, consuming everything, but it left me standing in the ashes, wondering who I was, without the heat to define me. Before leaving, I drove to the house one last time, the ridge silent under the morning sun, the windows dark, reflecting nothing. The feds had taped it off, yellow ribbons flapping in the breeze, but I slipped inside. Anyway, the air stale, heavy with ghosts. In Eli's room, I found a sketch tucked in his desk, a pencil drawing of us on a hike, grinning under a summer sky. His lines shaky but sure, the edges faded with time. My throat tightened, eyes burning as I traced our faces, a moment I couldn't claw back. He didn't want blood, I realized, just us. Safe, together. I folded it into my pocket, a tether to him I'd carry, a reason to let go. Back at the car, Lena leaned against the hood, her dark eyes steady, cutting through the haze. You good? She asked. Simple, no pressure, her voice a balm. Not yet, I said, climbing in, the sketch crinkling against my chest. But I will be. She drove us to my apartment, the city waking slow around us, brewery smoke curling into the air, the clatter of downtown stirring, the smell of hops and wet pavement drifting through the cracked window. Inside, I packed a bag clothes, the laptop. Inside, I packed a bag clothes, the laptop. That sketch of Eli and me, its edges soft from my fingers brushing over it too many times. The apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in with the weight of what I'd done, the peeling paint and creaky floorboards, a map of a life I didn't fit into anymore. The shoebox stayed behind, its contents emptied into the Fed's hands ledgers, cash, the gun's lockbox, all relics of a war I'd fought and won, but at a cost that still bled. I zipped the duffel, the sound sharp in the quiet, and turned to Lena, who stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the gray light, filtering through the blinds. Her dress was gone, swapped back for her usual jeans, a faded hoodie, ink curling up her arms like a story. I'd never fully read. Where to? She asked, her voice steady, her eyes locking on mine with that quiet strength I'd come to lean on. Anywhere but here, I said, hefting the bag over my shoulder, meeting her gaze. You in? She smiled, small but real, the kind that cut through the haze and reminded me there was something left worth holding on to. Always, she said, and the word landed soft, a promise I didn't have to ask for. We hit the road by noon, Highway 74 stretching west like an open vein, the mountains shrinking in the rearview mirror, their jagged peaks fading into a haze of green and gray. The truck's radio crackled to life, an old Johnny Cash song filling the cab with its low, mournful twang. I walked the line, the lyrics threading through the hum of the engine, a fitting echo of the path I'd carved. Lena hummed along, her voice soft, her hand brushing mine on the gear shift, a touch that felt like forgiveness. I hadn't earned but took anyway. The road ahead was open, uncertain, a question mark I didn't fear anymore, not with her beside me. Mom would recover, her body mending slow in that sterile hospital room, though the rift between us might never heal, her silence a scar I couldn't erase. June would rebuild in Charlotte, her kids' laughter a shield against the wreckage I'd left behind, her promise to call a thread I'd tug on someday, maybe. The cost had been steep, family lost, trust shattered, blood staining my hands like ink I couldn't wash off, but Eli's ghost was at peace. His name cleared, his death no longer a lie swallowed by the dark. That was enough. It had to be. The truck rolled through Tennessee by dusk, the sky bruising purple over rolling hills, the air cooling as we climbed higher, away from Asheville's grip. We stopped at a diner off the interstate, a neon-lit shack with chipped formica tables and the smell of fried onions thick in the air. Lena slid into a booth across from me, her boots tapping the linoleum, and ordered coffee black. No sugar, the way she liked it, strong enough to wake the dead. I got the same, plus a slice of pie I didn't touch, the fork resting on the plate as I stared out the window at the headlights streaking past, each one a fleeting story I'd never know. "You're quiet," she said, sipping her coffee, her eyes narrowing over the rim of the mug, reading me like she always could. "Just thinking," I said, leaning back, the vinyl creaking under me, about what comes next, what I do now that it's over. She set the mug down, her fingers tracing the handle, a rare hesitation flickering across her face. "What do you want it to be?" she asked, her voice soft but pointed, cutting to the bone. I didn't answer right away, the question sinking deep, stirring the ashes of what I'd burned. Revenge had been my compass, a north star guiding every step, every shot, every sleepless night. Without it, I was unmoored, drifting in a sea I didn't recognize. "I don't know," I said finally, honest, raw. "Something new, maybe. Something that's mine, not Dad's, not Vickers, not even Eli's. Just mine." She nodded, slow, like she'd expected it, her lips curling faintly. "You'll find it," she said, certain in a way I couldn't be. "You're stubborn as hell always have been. It's why I stuck around, even when you were an idiot." I laughed, a short, rough sound that surprised me, the first real break in the wait since the shed. "I was an idiot," I admitted, meeting her eyes, the memory of our breakup flashing her slamming the door, me too proud to chase her, too scared to say I loved her. "Still am, sometimes." "Sometimes," she agreed, smirking, but her hand slid across the table, resting over mine, warm and steady. "But you're my idiot, Rowan Keller. Don't forget that." The diner faded around us, the clatter of plates and murmur of truckers blurring into background noise as her words settled, a tether pulling me back from the edge. We finished the coffee, left a crumpled 20 on the table, and walked out into the night. The air crisp with the promise of frost, stars pricking through the dark above. The truck rumbled on, carrying us west. No destination set, just motion forward, away, towards something I couldn't name yet but felt flickering alive in my chest, a spark in the ashes. Lena drove, her profile sharp against the dashboard glow, and I watched her, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, a quiet beauty I'd almost lost. I didn't say it not yet, but I felt it. The words I'd choked on 6 months ago rising slow. I loved her. Always had. Maybe I'd tell her tomorrow, when the road stretched out again, when the weight lifted just enough to let them free. By midnight, we found a motel off a back road. A flickering sign promising vacancy, its red letters buzzing against the black. The room was small, musty, with a lumpy bed and a TV that didn't work. But it was ours for the night. A pause in the drift. Lena kicked off her boots, sprawling on the quilt, her hoodie bunched under her head like a pillow, while I sat on the edge, the duffel at my feet, the sketch pulled out one last time. I traced Eli's lines again, his grin frozen in pencil, and set it on the nightstand, letting it rest. "He'd be proud of you," Lena said, her voice sleepy, eyes half closed as she watched me. "You know that, right? Maybe," I said, lying back beside her, the mattress dipping under our weight. "Hope so." She shifted closer, her arm draping over my chest, her breath warm against my neck, and I let her pull me in, the first real peace I'd felt since the rain began. Sleep came slow, but it came, the road's hum fading into dreams not of blood or fire, but of mountains, clear and sharp, and a horizon I could reach.